Hello, this is Christina Simmons with the Say Yes to Holiness podcast. I am so glad that you're able to join me today because I have a really awesome guest with me today. An author, someone who is telling a story that, for me as a historian, a student of history, was absolutely fascinated by, particularly because, well, you know what, Heidi? I'm just going to go ahead and let you talk it instead of me. So, without further ado, Heidi Fishman, go ahead. Where are you? And let's just talk about your great book. Mhm.
Okay, well, my name's Heidi Fishman. I am in Vermont. I am a retired psychologist. And as a psychologist, I did a lot of work with people with trauma histories and also a lot of eating disorders. Those were my two areas where I uh,
Mm,
saw a lot of clients. But what I really like doing at this point is Holocaust education.
mm,
So I got into this because my mother is a Holocaust survivor.
mhm,
And way back, it seems like ancient history now, but in 2012, I invited my mother to come to my daughter's middle school class to tell her story of what she went through during the war years.
mm,
And as she was telling the story, I I was watching how the kids were reacting to what she was saying.
mhm.
And I just said, we have to write this down. This has to be a book. We can't let the story get lost. And my first instinct was to say, okay, do I know an author? Who can I find to write the story? And the more I thought about that, the more I really came up with that I was the only one who could do it, because it had to be someone who knew my mom really well to capture her voice.
Mhm,
And I knew my grandparents, so we had to capture their voices,
mm.
pull that all together. And I was the one who could push her to ask the questions and dig deep, where she wouldn't say, oh, stop it, I don't want to answer these questions anymore, because I'm her daughter, she can't say no.
Right, right.
So I wrote the book.
Oh, man, I mean, I'd say that you definitely nailed it. You've received what, 4 different awards, for this book?
Yeah,
And
at least.
and it's something where the fact that it's been recognized nationally of how well the story has been told is definitely a tribute to you in being able to dig deep and to ask those questions and then to share it with others so that they're able to really just how you build up the suspense and kind of go from chapter to chapter. And I think it's beautifully done. But one of the things I did want to ask is that, as you alluded to, you having to go deep with your mom, for you as a daughter, how was that? How did that impact your relationship in the midst of the book and then after the book was done?
um I would say that doing it really brought us closer. I mean, we
Mm,
were always close anyway, but she really loved it because I was calling her or emailing her, several times a day, mom, what about this and what about that? And I was, because we were constant conversation. Um,
mhm,
so she really, really loved that, even though the conversation wasn't necessarily her favorite topic in the world.
right.
But
Mhm,
there was a lot of reminiscing about my grandparents and about her brother, and so there was um, good stories told, even though there was a lot of difficulty
mhm,
in the story.
right.
And it really was, me constantly, saying like, okay, mom, I need something else to make this chapter more real. Can you give me anything?
Mhm,
Can you tell me what the clothing looked like? Can you tell me what the smells were like? Anything. I try to draw details out,
mhm,
not just always the historical details, but the literary details.
mhm.
I wanted to make it as real as possible.
Yeah, how did you come to know to do that? 'Cause, we were talking before and you said that you're not a writer, that's not your thing, and so how was it that you were able to develop that skill?
I think it really came from my psychologist background.
Okay. Mm,
As a therapist, when I talk to clients, I
mhm,
really am trying to draw out all the details, because you never know which detail is going to be the one that gives them the aha moment where
mm,
they grow from it.
mhm,
And so I didn't know what the aha moments were going to be for me when I was putting words on a page. And
Mhm.
so I had to find them by just asking, asking, asking. I didn't know where it was gonna, I didn't know which details I'd use, but I always knew I needed more. Um,
Wow.
and then I wasn't only interviewing my mother, I found people who were in the same place as she was at the same time that either knew her or didn't know her.
Mhm.
Somebody who could tell me about her from their perspective, or
Mm.
somebody who just happened to be in the same place for the same event and they could give me their version of the story because maybe they were a little older than my mother and they had a different, um, a more complete memory because she was just a child.
Right.
It was just shy of her 10th birthday when the war was over.
Mm.
Um,
Wow.
so her memories are definitely a child's memories, not an adult's memories, which is very different.
Mhm. Right. And, so in the midst of that, as you found other people, what did you see that to be something that was beneficial for your mom too, for her to be able to process all of it? Or
Oh, I found some of her old friends, and she was
Ah,
just
wow,
flabbergasted. You know,
wow.
there's a few of her friends in the book, and I spoke to them, and we exchanged emails, and my mom exchanged emails with them, and it's like, oh, what are you doing now? And it
Mhm.
wasn't always easy because some people's names are completely different.
Mhm.
They've been anglicized. Women who've gotten married and they have a different last name, and it's
Mhm.
not always easy to find people. But so that's another skill. I sort of became an internet sleuth.
Mhm. Yeah, something happened similarly in our family on my mom's side. So, my grandfather and his family, they came from Slovenia, and so as they came into the country, they were Rijavec. So it was Rijavec. And what happened was is that they put that, but then someone thought it was a Y, so the I and the J became a Y, and then they were Ryavec, Ryavec. And there was so much of that that happened in the midst of that, but I can only imagine even more so with incomplete records. I read one of your recent blog posts. It might not have been that recent, but about the Torahs that came, that you have in your own sanctuary. I'm
Mhm.
sorry.
The
So
synagogue in Woodstock, Vermont. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. And so it was something of where just how they came to be where with you so that and then being able to share that history with those who are like, well, how did our sacred documents come to you in
Right.
America?
You're right. Some small town Czech Torah is in Woodstock, Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
That is a Holocaust story, which actually has nothing to do with my mother.
Right.
It was
Yeah.
that's really different. But yeah, that's just a whole nother story that, that these Torahs were saved. And they're all in horrible condition,
Mm-hmm.
really horrible condition.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, but the reason and partially why I bring that up though is that history really is like a detective story of putting pieces together. And then when so often, so I was a history teacher for a period of time with middle schoolers, and that was the thing of where they'd look at the textbook and they'd be like, what does this have to do with me? And that's actually how I wrote two of my initial books 20 years ago. Was I created stories, and it was kids like them, but they were in those circumstances, and they were meeting those people, and then it was just telling stories, and they're like, "Oh, okay, now I kinda alright, yeah," and, it starts to hit.
that's
So
and I was that kid.
mm,
In sixth grade, I actually had our history teacher came into class one day and he said, okay, today we're gonna have a completely different kind of day. You can ask me any question you want and I'll answer it. I'm like,
mm,
oh, great, okay, So my question was, why are we studying ancient history? It doesn't matter. It already happened. It's got no bearing
mhm,
on our lives. This
yep,
is stupid. I just want to study the future. I want to study science. I want to know what's going to happen in my life. That was
mhm,
and his answer was, Heidi, you'll figure it out one day.
mhm,
And I didn't know it would take me till I was like, in my 50s to figure it out, but yeah, that's what it took. Um, and it's when you read a textbook as a kid, it is dry. It
Oh
is
gosh, yes.
dates and like these ancient looking pictures, and it's just not interesting. And
Mhm.
so when I wrote this book, which I really did write for middle school, that was my target audience. Adults are loving it too,
Mhm.
but it's for middle school. Um, I wanted it to be alive for the kids, and I
Mhm.
wanted it to be about relationships and empathy,
Mhm.
and not just to learn what happened, but what it must have felt for the people who went through it. Because the whole point is to build empathy so that in the future
Mhm.
they learn from history, that they say,
Right.
oh, that happened then because people acted that way. I don't want to act that way. I want to act a different way.
Right.
Or, that person did a wonderful thing in the past. I want to act like that person did. And
Mhm.
that's all about empathy.
Right.
That's what I wanted to bring onto the page. So that was my psychology coming into the history, into the writing.
Mhm. No, and it's beautiful. And that was exactly what I was trying to do when I was in a classroom as well, was make history come alive. And it was something of where everyone talks about you need to know history so you can't repeat the mistakes of history. And while there is a piece of that, I think you highlighted beautifully why it is that we need to enter into conversations about what has happened in each of our lives. I think reason why I'm so drawn and I so appreciate the work that you've done is that because this is a real human being who is sharing their story, and it's not something that was made up.
Right.
This is something that was real, that happened, and you're going, "No way, that no, that no, people would never do that." And it's like, "Oh, yes, they would."
Right.
And all of us struggle with that light and that dark, in ourselves, and we have to recognize the ability for us to move towards that darkness, to move towards doing things that aren't empathizing, aren't caring for the person who's in front of us, or we're dehumanizing them so that that way we can feel better.
Mhm.
And those are such important lessons now, I think, especially I mean, shoot, let alone in the middle of a pandemic, but especially in our world where we are disconnected from one another, where we can live in our own little world and we never hear a point of view that's different from the one that everybody around us is speaking.
Exactly. And social media has like really emphasized that, where
Yeah.
you all, like your friends on Facebook all have the same viewpoint as you do, and you don't
Mhm.
talk to people who have a different viewpoint, and people they've lost the art of just debate, of friendly debate. Oh, I disagree with you. Well, why do you disagree with me? Well, what about this point? What about that point? And learning from each other. Now they just get mad and slam the door at each other, so to speak. um, and there's all this people seeing other people as quote unquote other, that there's
Mm.
something so different about them, whether
Right.
it's religion or race or politics or the language they speak or and my whole point on the book too is we're not all that different from each other.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, Tutti was a little girl, worried about her parents, and her parents were worried about her, and they want to know if they were going to have a good meal at the end of the day and if they were going to be safe. Is that
Mhm.
so different from anybody's story? Really? You know,
Right.
eh, we all go through that, different in different ways. So
Mhm. No, absolutely. And is that what you kind of have found your passion of doing Holocaust education, of where you get to share that, what you were just speaking about?
absolutely. Now I'm going to schools. Well, now I'm going to schools virtually. A
Mhm.
couple weeks ago, I spent an afternoon in outside of Birmingham, and a
Mhm.
couple days later, I was at a school all day in Maryland. But that's just through Zoom.
Mhm.
But in reality, before the pandemic, I was going to schools, and sometimes I tell my mom's story because they they haven't read the book. Sometimes the school has read the whole Tutti's Promise, and it's more about telling them how I did the research and how I found out the information that's in the book, and
Mhm.
where did I find that document that's got, you know, very important information on it, and
Right.
how did I find it? And
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot of those surprises in the book, which surprised me when I found them. So,
Yeah, and I think sometimes, there's such a state of disbelief that, "Oh, you must have made that document," in order to fit your story. I mean, kind
okay.
of, perspective, I mean, it's just out there, and it's something that I struggle with so strongly because I'm like, "Are you thinking?" I mean, that's not logical, of the, it's kind of like if I'm going to tell you a story about how I came to, acquire this piece of, paper, this piece of, evidence that supports what happened or gives us insight on what happened, I think I'd come up with a better story than how it happened. It's something that, you know, and people just like, "Oh, no, no." But that's a level that, I've run into sometimes of where people are like, "Oh, that didn't happen because that was all made up." So, like, for example, we never went to the moon, and I
That's conspiracy theories that I won't
exactly.
even, it's, Holocaust denial is a real problem.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a real problem. And I don't understand how anybody can deny it.
Mhm,
Um, but it's rooted in anti-Semitism, which is what I'm
mhm.
trying to fight. But
Right,
it's not just anti-Semitism. I'm not just doing these lessons in order to um, protect Jews.
right.
I'm trying to protect everybody,
Yep.
because it's not just a Jewish story. In the Holocaust, Hitler went after people with mental and physical handicaps, and he went after people who are Slavic, Polish,
Mm,
Jehovah's Witness. It was hate for all. Really, if unless you were the mainstream, you were disposable,
yep.
and that was just terrible. And so, the idea that people would say that these documents are not real,
Mhm.
that's crazy. I mean, that's just not. I wouldn't even entertain that. If somebody came to me and said that, I wouldn't entertain that as even debatable. Um,
Right. And what most people don't realize is that that's the basis of in one of your blog articles you used from the Anti-Defamation League, that pyramid, of
right,
how it is that we move towards hate. Yeah.
right.
And when we refuse to engage with truth, or we think that truth can be manipulated, because that's where I see the greatest challenges right now, is that people don't believe that there's any truth at all. It's like, that's your truth, and I got my truth, and you manipulate your truth because I know we manipulate ours, or at least we make it so that it fits our story.
Yeah.
And so there's that, and all of those playing into our biases, our stereotypes, our misinformation. As you said, it's all that denial that we truly are like one another. It's just the outer, shell that tends to be a little bit different at times.
Mhm.
But all of us have inherent value. How could we even think of, this little child? How can we even think that this little child should be killed because they happen to be a particular race or a particular religion, or,
Right.
um, yeah.
And
And
during the Holocaust, it wasn't even about a belief system. You,
mhm,
you were deemed a Jew by depending on what your grandparents were. It,
right.
it was really none of your own. You couldn't even just say, "Well, I don't really believe that, so leave me alone." If
Mhm,
you happen to feel that way, you know, it
yep.
was. This is how you were born, therefore,
Mhm,
we don't want you. Which is just horrendous. It's awful. How can human beings do that?
yeah.
It's
Yeah, it is. But on the other side, is the great hope of like what you're experiencing of different schools wanting you to come and to speak about it and to share the story and to help young people know, no, this is real. This is something that we need to be attentive to, and we need to know that this needs to never happen again. And so is that part of why, so you have a whole bunch of resources on your website, and by the way, would you share that website with people?
The website, it's called Popja and Me. So I'll spell that
Mhm,
POPJEANDME.com.
mhm.
And Popja is just the name of my mother's doll that she had during this time period. But you can also find my website if you go to tuttispromise.com. It'll redirect you. And Tutti is Tutti. So Tutti's Promise, TUTTIS, and then the word promise.com.
I'll put both of those in the show notes, so that way people can find them. But you said that Papia was your mom had a doll in the midst of all of this?
Yeah, I mean that, and that's it. Actually, that we still have the doll. Okay, the doll
Wow.
still exists. So it's a little bit a convoluted story. How would I explain this quickly? So my grandfather was a metals commodities dealer. That was his
Okay.
job before the war. The Nazis felt metals were very important. Obviously, they needed, when you're waging a war, you need metal.
Mhm.
And so they basically used my grandfather, used his knowledge to try to find more scrap metal. Where's metal in the Netherlands? How can we find metal? Where is it? Um, and so that kept the family out of the camps for a very long time.
Mhm.
Then they ended up in Westerbork, which is the transit camp in the Netherlands.
Mm.
But while they were imprisoned in Westerbork, my grandfather was still being sent to Amsterdam to do this metal buying and selling. So he might be 2 days in Amsterdam and then 3 days at the camp and then back to Amsterdam, back to the camp. And of course, he came back. He didn't run away because his family was there as hostages by the Nazis. Um, and during one of those trips, he was able to buy a doll for my mother and
Mm.
gave it to her for her ninth birthday.
Wow.
Now, what little 9-year-old girl got a birthday present of a brand new doll
Mhm.
during the Holocaust while incarcerated in a concentration camp? Not
Right.
many. But the doll was really special because my grandfather took some money that, the only money he had left, basically, he hid it inside the doll. And when he gave the doll to my mother, he said, "This is our only money left. We might need it for buying food one day or bribing somebody or keeping us alive. You are in charge of this doll. This is
Mm.
your responsibility. Never let anybody take it from you."
Mm.
And
Wow.
that was her responsibility for the rest of the war.
Mhm.
And when I was writing Tootie's Promise and she had the doll,
Mhm.
it was like, "Mom, I think we need to put it in a museum, or something." And it's actually in a museum in Connecticut right now.
Okay. But wow. So the realization that all of us can have, the what I'm taking from that is that all of us have an important role to play, particularly in our families. No one is, replaceable. Everyone has a role, and is important to a family, and that's beautiful. I was making mention about the resources, and I just want to circle back to that real briefly because you design your resources using an understanding by design framework, which pretty much is just you plan with the end in mind. So I wanted to ask the question, kind of as we're finishing up, what end were you hoping for or working, for as you wrote the book and as you have been doing your Holocaust education? What is it that you're hoping for? What's the end in mind that you are working for?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is for people to understand the Holocaust,
Mhm.
to know what happened. But I wanted to introduce it to children in a friendly understandable, digestible way where it wasn't going to terrify them. There's a fine line between learning with some empathy and just being completely overwhelmed and I can't deal with this. And in middle school, those kids are there anyway, like every day. But so I
Mhm.
was trying to hit that fine line. But I wanted them to learn more than just what happened. I wanted them to, again, like you said before, that this is about real people. These were families, these were mothers and daughters and fathers and husbands and, all trying to get along through this situation. And
Mhm.
I wanted the readers and the students I talked to realize how important it is that we fight bigotry and we don't hold prejudice in our
Mhm.
own hearts. And if when you see something bad going on, that you stand up to it, whether
Mhm.
it's the bully at school or it's an adult doing something wrong in the community, that you tell somebody, you say, I don't think this is right. I think we need to change this. Somebody needs to talk to that person.
Mhm.
And not just about, people talk about tolerance, having tolerance for people that are different. I don't like that word at all. I
It's an improper definition of tolerance.
need acceptance for people who
Right.
we think are different.
Mhm.
If somebody's, again, a different gender, a different sexual orientation, a different religion, a different color,
Mhm.
a different background, their family's kitchen smells different than your kitchen because they eat different types of foods. It doesn't matter. That's my whole
Mhm.
point. It doesn't matter
Yep.
because in the end, we all really want the same thing.
Mm.
We want to know our families are okay. We want to have a warm house. Well, when we're in Vermont, we want a warm house. There's other places we might want a cool house.
Mhm.
We want to know there's going to be enough food on the table. We want to, feel like there's something important in the world. Important, to live up to.
Right.
It's a very human, universal message, and
Mhm.
we got to get through all that other stuff to get there.
No, we definitely do. And so one of the things that by the time this podcast comes out, is going to be very close to our Holy Week. So, being Roman Catholic and Holy Week, and one of the things that the church is very attentive to during Holy Week, particularly for Good Friday. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but actually each year, the message is shared of the fact that we are the Jews in the scene of where it's like when because we reenact, we read the gospel aloud and we, the crowd, say crucify him, and it's not the Jews, it's the crowd, and the fact is we are the Jews. And that Jesus and Mary and Joseph, they were all Jews. They were practicing Jews who, and but the fact is that we are the other. We say other, but we are them. And so I forget who said it. We found the enemy, and they are us.
Mhm. Yep.
And that's the essence of our prejudice. That's the essence of our bigotry. And so anything that allows us to be able to recognize that, and for us to then grow in love for our fellow brothers and sisters. And I firmly believe that your book definitely does that. So thank you for that.
You're going to talk about Holy Week. I'm just going to throw, got Passover about the same time as
Yes.
Easter every year. They're
Yes.
always overlapping, a little
Yep.
before, a little after.
Hmm.
You reenact what you reenact, and we reenact what we reenact when we have a Seder. And we
Yes.
talk about, the leaving Egypt and getting away from slavery. But
Hmm.
why do we tell that story? Why do we tell it every year? Because
Hmm.
we still are slaves to certain things. There's still things holding us back. There's still
Yep.
problems in the world, and we still need to overcome those and
Hmm.
move beyond them. So
Hmm.
it's, these religions are not that different.
Oh, no, no. I mean, we're completely rooted in the Jewish faith, and so it's something of where, absolutely love and honor, the entire tradition. And that's part of why my heart broke when, I saw the Torahs in such bad, condition, because that's our, that's the Bible. That's the
Right.
equivalent.
Yep.
Your Pentateuch, and it's the equivalent. But I came across it, which was the phrase, the quote was, "Remembrance is the secret of redemption."
I like
And I think that that really kind of summarizes what we're all to be about, is that why do we study history? Going back to your sixth grade history teacher's question,
mhm.
well, it's by remembering that we have our redemption, is possible. But when we don't remember, there is no hope.
Then we're just stuck in the morass and yeah,
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. But there's hope. And that's that's the beauty of the story that you shared, and you did it so well. So one more time, let everybody know where they can find you, and get more information and all your
Those
free.
who are looking, I'll hold the book up.
There
Uh,
we go.
the book is called Tutti's Promise, Tutti, Promise. I'm Heidi Fishman. You can get the book on Amazon, of course, but you can also go to your local bookstore and ask them to order it for you, which I support 100%. Teachers, right
Mhm.
now I'm actually giving away some free ebooks that if teachers go to my website, which is papiaandme.com, there's a little place to click right on the front page, and I can send you a free ebook if you want to review it and maybe use it in your classroom.
Mhm.
Um, and for teachers who order multiple copies of the actual book, if you go directly to the publisher, you get a very nice discount.
Mm,
Don't have a classroom of 100 kids, buy it at full price. You don't need to do that.
right.
Um, and I am available. You can, again, through my website, you go to the contact me, and I'm happy to talk at your school, your church, your library, virtually now, later, in person again.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. It has been such a pleasure. I really enjoyed getting to know a little bit more of your family's history, as you have shared it. And then also, it's so evident, of your passion for wanting to share the Holocaust so that we can remember, and so that we can fight bigotry, and the prejudice that it resides in all of us. And if we don't guard against it, and to do the good. So thank you so much, for your work, and I've so enjoyed our time together. So um, yeah, well, everybody, thank you again for joining us today, for the equivalent of a little fireside chat, a little bit different. But as we're heading into Holy Week, be very mindful of the fact of what Heidi said earlier, which is it doesn't matter, because we all want the same things. And that's what we need to remember. We all want the same things. And it's in remembering that we have the secret of our redemption at hand. So I let uh, I just want you all to know that I continue to pray for you, especially during this very high holy season, that you're able to continue doing whatever it takes so that you're able to tell the master of death, not today. Have a wonderful day, and talk with all of you again soon.